No, EA is not changing. They're the same company they've been for over a decade, and unlike some YouTubers who would just speculate this, I'm actually going to provide some examples and proof as to why they're not changing, why they don't need to change, and why these latest examples of EA apparently being reborn into a pro-consumer company are nothing more than a clever marketing tactic. Now, I wanted to make this video about 2 weeks ago when EA initially announced that they were not going to be putting microtransactions of any sort into the new Respawn Star Wars game. The reason I didn't was because I needed some more time to process it. I got caught up in the latest hour-and-a-half long critique of Red Dead Redemption 2, links down below. But I'd be lying if I also said I wanted to see how this news would mature and how other gaming journalists, commentators, whatever the hell you call me, would respond to this news. Because it is good news. It's good to hear that they're not going to be cramming microtransactions into a single-player game. But the tendency I've noticed with a lot of larger gaming YouTubers is that they react as if everything is either the end of the world or the greatest news in the history of the world. It's an incredibly knee-jerky industry, gaming journalism. And I was wondering whether or not we would run into the same issues with this news, and sure enough, we did. Now, I'm not a big fan of YouTube drama, and I've never wanted to make videos that are purely designed to leech off of somebody else's popularity. It's just not something I want to do. If you're a creator who does that, more power to you. You're playing the system, and you're probably far more popular than I am, but I've just never wanted to do that with my content. Rather, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at a bunch of the business background information to try to put context to this decision, and we're also going to look at it in a subjective and also objective way to try to figure out what the heck is actually going on, rather than just speculate and talk about our feelings, which is fun, and I suppose there's a time and place for that, but when you're looking for the truth, that's often not very helpful. Now, to begin a deep dive into this topic, I think it's important to have some much needed context around all of these latest decisions, specifically around the Star Wars franchise. Now, everybody knows about the Battlefront 2 controversy with all of the pay-to-win mechanics that were in there, the terrible microtransactions that caused even Disney to call out EA, telling them to stop it, which is insane. For real, it's like Hitler calling out Mao, saying, okay, I think you're being a little too cruel to your citizens, let's tone it back a little. Like, Disney is the pinnacle of corporate corruption. They own almost everything on this planet, and so the fact that they were calling EA out for greedy practices really says a lot. However, beyond that, another important piece of information is that Visceral Studios, which was another studio that was underneath the purview of Electronic Arts, EA, they were centered just outside of San Francisco in the San Francisco Peninsula, but in another city just adjacent to it. They were shut down back in 2017 as they were developing a Star Wars project headed up by Amy Hennig, who was one of the original creators and developers behind the Uncharted franchise. And this game was often described as Star Wars mixed with Uncharted, which, needless to say, made many people incredibly excited, and I was one of those people. However, EA shut the game down because it didn't meet their standards in terms of quality, and it also wasn't going to live up to their longevity standards, whatever that means. Basically, what most people assume that means is that the game wasn't going to be multiplayer, they weren't going to be able to milk it for years and years to come, and so they just decided to cut it loose. They didn't see it being as profitable as they needed it to be to justify the overwhelming expense associated with developing it, so they just cut it loose and moved on. Furthermore, after they shut down Visceral, they actually handed over the same project to another studio within their purview, and then they shut it down completely, the project and that team as well, after a few months of that development not going anywhere and the reworking of it just not happening. And so I think the natural assumption that many people made, including myself, was that the Respawn Star Wars game that we all knew was in development but we didn't know anything about was probably going to fall victim to the same practices. They were going to add in multiplayer modes. Sure, a single player campaign was going to be at the center of it, allegedly, but they were likely going to try to implement some of those same things that they said Visceral's game was lacking, and that's why they shut down Visceral. So it only made sense that they were going to throw those things into the Respawn game. However, this didn't happen. We just got news that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is a single-player story game with no multiplayer and no microtransactions. And this was initially something that was just being speculated after the announcement trailer where they really showed off the cinematics and the storytelling aspect of the game. But then EA actually responded to their own tweet saying, no microtransactions, no loot boxes, and no, we won't be adding them. A single-player Star Wars story for those of you who are ready to become a Jedi. Needless to say, I was shocked. And I wasn't the only one. Many other people were looking at this, assuming that EA was making some huge change to their business model. They learned their lesson after Battlefront 2 and they were going to change everything, flip it around, and become a company that everybody could root for. And again, I don't want to call any names out, but there were a fair number of YouTubers who made a lot of clickbaity titled videos claiming this very thing, that EA was making a major shift out of corporate corruption and we're moving towards a very pro-consumer way of lining up their products, which is just not true. I mean, I think it's important to stress, like, I would love it if this were true. It'd be great. I think everybody would love it if this were true, but it's just not. EA is not that type of company. And when we look at the financials, as we will in just a second, I think you'll see that that's not what they're doing. Now, one of the areas of focus study when you're pursuing like an investment degree in college or a corporate finance degree in college, which is my focus, you tend to do a lot of work looking at what a company is trying to achieve. And I know that sounds simple, but it makes sense. If you're trying to figure out whether or not you should invest in a particular firm, it only makes sense that you figure out what their ultimate goals are so that you can predict whether or not they're going to be successful in achieving those goals. After all, the whole point of investment is that you give them your money so that they can grow their company and then you can get a return on it. It's investment 101. And so because an investor's only real concern at the end of the day is liquidity and then also overall growth of the company and the value therein, you have to know what they're doing. You have to know what their priorities are and what their prospects are moving forward. If you don't know that, you can't be a successful investor. So I've actually spent a fair amount of time looking at EA. Of course, classes kind of demand it and mandate it. The teachers ask you to look up a company. So I figured, double trouble. I'll cover it for my class and then I'll also get to use that same information for a YouTube video. Smart, right? It's either smart or lazy. I don't know which though. Whoever made this at Starbucks, if you're watching this, I know you're probably not, but if you are watching this, you did a good job. Now, with a company such as EA, it's important to stress that the name of the game at the end of the day is overall revenue with their exclusive franchises. This is why EA pays billions of dollars in order to achieve exclusive rights to make games in the NFL franchise, with FIFA. All of these games they have exclusive rights to do, and they can afford this because the games are ridiculously successful. Such as FIFA 18. FIFA 18 actually sold roughly 24 million copies in the year that it was out and new, and grossed over $3 billion, which is ridiculous. Bear in mind, for a lot of gaming companies, that would be enough to maintain their company for an entire year. Like that's one and done. Go home, clean it up, sign, seal, deliver, call you in the morning. But no, for them, that's one of their franchises that releases annually. When you factor in games such as Madden and any of their other subsidiary sports titles, they have unbelievable amounts of money rolling through their company on an annual basis. These games are where you get all of the revenue being generated. This is where the profits come from. Games such as Respawn's Star Wars game, I know it sounds ridiculous, but they're actually a pretty small portion of their overall business. Now, even with record-breaking sales revenues, profitability in terms of their overall margin on each product that they're selling, EA still fell victim to the same rough adjustment in the gaming industry that we experienced last year, and they're still recovering from it. They had been trading around $150 per share. Now they trade anywhere from $94 to $105 typically, and in a couple months that could even go up towards $110, $115. Point being, they were not invulnerable to the effect that rippled through the entire gaming industry. If you want to know more about that, I did another video. I'll have it linked below. Now, one of the most important charts that I can actually show you in terms of EA's overall business is this one right here that my big head is blocking. The important information to know here is that the blue bar is the total revenue that EA is bringing in. The green bar in relation to the blue bar is the digital revenue. So the green bar shows the amount of that blue bar that was digital. And the reason that this is important, especially moving forward, is because this is how a company such as EA, who's in the business of software distribution, this is how they can increase their margin, making their business more profitable, making it so they don't have to cram as many microtransactions into a game in order to pay all of their bills. This is why it's important, because the bigger that green bar gets in relation to the blue bar, the more money they can make. And the reason that EA has been considered a buy by most investment analysts over the last few years is because this green bar just keeps getting bigger and bigger. I'm going the wrong way. Bigger and bigger and bigger as it moves on and as the years go by. And the effect of this is seen in the gross profit margin, which you can see in this chart right here, where currently at the end of 2018, when the Motley Fool ran this analysis last, their gross profit margin was sitting at 73.53%, which compared to what it was even back in 2010, that's a pretty significant jump. In some cases, 20% increase in a decade. That's pretty significant. And it's not something you can see in almost any other industry except for software. A company like Apple or Samsung who's dealing in hardware, sure, the cost of that hardware can decrease, but every year, or at least on a cyclical basis, you're going to have to upgrade that hardware, which is going to be more expensive. So your margins always stay fairly consistent. EA and other software companies with their own distribution services, such as Uplay for Ubisoft, BethesdaNet for Bethesda, or in the case of EA, Origins, that allows them to sell the game directly to you with zeros and ones, no real overhead other than the maintenance of that online platform, and as a result, their margins increase. Now, what does this actually mean? We can look at numbers all day. I can show you a bunch of charts pretending to be intelligent, but it doesn't actually mean anything if I can't translate it for you. So let's do it. My voice was so low just then. Did you hear that? That was weird. It's like I grab onto a mocha and it turns me into Thor himself. What this means effectively is that EA, when they're looking at a franchise such as Star Wars, they're going to want to turn it into the new FIFA. They're going to want to turn it into the new Madden and try to monetize it in the same way. Part of the reason that they sell so many copies of FIFA is, of course, because it's a global phenomenon. And so naturally, when they look at Star Wars and they look at a game like Battlefront, they think, oh, this is also going to be a phenomenon, which is why they had initial sales estimates of 7 to 10 million units for those games, which again, for any other studio would be a wild success story, but for them, that's their starting barometer. If they don't hit 7 to 10 million units sold in the first few months of the game's release, it's considered a flop. Now, I've said this before, and it's a little cheeky, so bear with me, but what I mean is EA's biggest asset is the fact that they have licenses to games and franchises such as Star Wars, FIFA, Madden, all of these franchises that they hold exclusive rights to and that bring them in billions of dollars worth of revenue every single year. But one of their biggest liabilities in terms of moving forward in the future is the fact that they hold these exclusive franchises. It's bringing them in unbelievable sums of cash now, but when you do exceptionally well in the business world, all of your investors, all of your creditors, everybody expects you to continue doing that. And more importantly, not just continue and maintaining, they don't want you to tread water, they want you to move forward. They expect growth. That's the only reason they're giving you money. For instance, you can have $1 trillion company such as Windows today, or Microsoft rather, who owns Windows. Microsoft closed the market today with a market cap over $1 trillion. That doesn't mean anything if they're not growing. If it comes out tomorrow that Microsoft is shrinking, all of that's going to dry up because investors are not going to get their money back. And so a company like EA has to continue to convince everybody that they can expand their business into new markets, new sectors, and to, more importantly, make those sectors loyal clients who are going to continue giving them money for years and years to come. This is where we get to all of the Star Wars discussions. And I think a lot of the issues that EA encountered with the first two Battlefront games under their watch had to do with their misunderstanding of who Star Wars fans are and how gamers would react to their favorite franchise being turned into another cash cow. You see, a franchise such as FIFA can do fairly anti-consumer things, such as locking a ton of stuff behind paywalls, having unbelievable amounts of microtransactions littering the game's landscape. And they can do that because the players, or at least the overwhelming majority of players who are engaging with that gameplay loop, don't really mind. A lot of FIFA players are only playing 1 or 2 games a year, and one of those is FIFA. And so they don't really mind if there's microtransactions. That's what they're used to. They don't really know any better. And it's not to call them stupid. It's not to say that they're wrong for playing the game. It's just to say that the market for FIFA and Madden and these larger sports games are just not the same. They're not the same. Not the same as the broader gaming market, I should clarify. The broader gaming market, and more specifically the gaming market that's comprised of players who keep up to date with gaming news and play a lot of different games every year that are very varied in terms of single player, multiplayer, microtransactions, and no microtransactions, those players do not have a very high tolerance for these types of monetization models. They don't like it, and they will make sure to let you know that they don't like it. EA's big mistake with Battlefront was that they thought they could treat these new players, the new Star Wars subset of gamers, the same way that they treated Madden players and FIFA players, and they obviously couldn't. So when it came time again for the next round of games, and they brought out Battlefront 2, they unveiled this massive single-player campaign. It ended up not being very massive, but they said, we've got a single-player campaign for you, and we put a lot of work into it. It's very narrative, and it adds a new chapter to the Star Wars story we think that you'll really like. And gamers were interested. Maybe EA had learned, and then it turned out they hadn't, and they thought that if they satiated the single-player component of the gaming industry, they could continue to treat the multiplayer component of the Star Wars fan base in this FIFA-esque way, which again, they stood up, revolted, and were not okay with. As I said earlier, to the point where even Disney came in and said, okay, let's calm down, this is ridiculous. And so when I look at this latest news that EA is approaching their Respawn title with a much more respectful monetization model as opposed to the microtransaction-filled mess that was Battlefront 2, I don't see it as EA fundamentally shifting the way that they approach these types of games. What I rather see it as is them trying to tap into a new, albeit much, much smaller market than they initially planned. That smaller market being the single-player Star Wars fan base that they initially were trying to appeal to sort of with Battlefront 2, and perhaps they tapped into it a little with that game, but their blunders with the multiplayer undid all of that work that they did. So now they're trying to go after that smaller group with a much more targeted title, and they'll go after the multiplayer group again in Battlefront 3 whenever we get that. Point being, EA isn't changing. They're doing the exact same thing that they've done for a decade, which is targeting new and smaller subgroups of subgroups of subgroups and different demographics in order to try to grow their business, which is good. The only reason that people aren't freaking out about this one is because this subgroup happens to be one that tends to stand up for themselves. And that's just something that EA hasn't been used to. And so in order to appeal to this subgroup, EA has to approach them in a respectful way that they approve of. Does this mean that EA is also going to cut microtransactions out of the next Star Wars game that has multiplayer? No, not at all. In fact, I would expect to see them twisted in all sorts of ways, and it's going to be the same type of thing that we've expected from them for years and years and years. But because this Respawn game is one that's targeted specifically at a narrow subset of gamers, Star Wars fans and single-player fans who are not too concerned with multiplayer, they're allowing it to pass. They're allowing it to happen, and their current leadership looked at it, and instead of saying, as they did with Amy Hennig, no, we're cutting this loose, it's too expensive, we don't want it, we don't think it justifies the cost, they're looking at it and they say, okay, I think we could actually make something from this. In my opinion, it's a far more intelligent way of dealing with the Star Wars fan base. They should have known this was a hot potato when they signed on to create Star Wars games, but I guess they're just now learning that a lot of Star Wars games are also nerds and that they're geeks and they follow gaming and they're not okay with the same crap that gets pulled with FIFA fans and Madden fans and has been for years. The broader lesson also is that if you stand up for yourself as a consumer, eventually the company has to learn, Because if they're interested in profits, if they're interested in expanding their business, they have to listen to you. Otherwise, they're not going to get your business. Again, capitalism is all about providing a product or service to a customer in a consensual exchange where both parties benefit. I give you $10 and I get something in exchange that I want, and in exchange you get $10, which is what you wanted. The second that I no longer feel I'm getting anything of value from you for that $10, I no longer engage in that transaction, and you have to change the product that you're offering in order to make it worth my $10. And amazingly enough, it's taken a little while for this to hit EA and for gamers to realize they don't have to buy every Star Wars game that comes out. But hopefully moving forward, we continue to remember that you can vote for your wallet. If you're not okay with what they're doing, just don't buy the product. It's relatively simple. But that's all from me. Again, these videos like this one, I intended it to be maybe 6-7 minutes long, and I don't know what this is going to end up being when it's all cut down, but I know for sure it's not 6 or 7 minutes. For that reason, I want to thank you for watching. Honestly and truly, if you got all the way through this, you are a scholar and a saint. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the like button. It actually does help. You know, I'm not just saying it does help the video perform better. And if you want to see some of my other content, as I said, all those videos I discussed will be linked down below. Let me know your thoughts on the Respawn Star Wars game. I'm honestly interested to hear about them all down in the comment section below. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.